Hi, Doug McLennan here at the Ojai Music Festival, Saturday night, and we have just concluded the first concert, two halves. First half we heard Lou Harrison's Symphonic Suite for Strings, and just concluded with a 63-minute version of John Luther Adams' piece, which is a tribute to his friend Lou Harrison, and the piece is called For Lou Harrison. Joining me right now is Yuval Sharon, the stage director and artistic director of The Industry in Los Angeles. And tell us what that is first.
Well, The Industry is a company that I started a couple of years ago for new and experimental opera. We started with our inaugural production last May of Anne LeBaron's Crescent City, and we have our next opera happening in October at LA's Union Station.
Which is kind of an interesting thing. It's opera for headphones. You have to wear headphones to hear it.
Exactly. It's going to be something in which the whole audience hears the piece via wireless headphones. The singers are on mics, and the orchestra is in another building, and they wander through the train station, and you kind of spend the opera looking for the performers.
And how do you expect that people are actually going to get to their trains?
Well, we're not building a set, and we're not blocking any alleyways, so everyone can still make it to exactly what they want to do at Union Station. But it's a piece that lives in the everyday life of the station, and that's a big part of the concept for it. So, I mean, I have to say that it's been really great to be here at Ojai, to be hearing these pieces that are all kind of coming from a time in which not all, obviously this piece that we just heard is a contemporary piece, but Lou Harrison and John Cage and Henry Cowell spent so much of their lives and careers listening for how sounds interact with everyday life, and that blurring of the space between life and art is something that I think is really beautiful about so much of the work that is actually on Ojai's festival this particular weekend, and is a big part of that opera.
In a way, it sort of refocuses it as a kind of complete. I hesitate to use the word multimedia because it's not really what I mean, but it's the experience of the thing in a space, in a time, in a place, in a physicality.
That's right. I mean, it's definitely a site-specific piece. It's definitely a project that is about the architecture of the space and the life of the space and the history of the space and our dreams of that space. And I mean, it's a place with a lot of imaginary histories too, because of how many films it's been in. I always think of Blade Runner actually when I go to that space. So, but
so are you a fan of Lou Harrison?
I love Lou Harrison's music. I think his music is, he's, to me, there's a group of composers that really represent the independent spirit of American music, and I think that Lou Harrison is really high among that list. I mean, I would put him in the same category as people like John Cage and Terry Riley and Pauline Oliveros, and these real innovators, the people that didn't create music in any way that people expected from them, but really followed their own hearts and their own ideas to a really, really radical distance. And that's something I just completely admire. And Lou's music is so different from some of the other composers on the program because it's such a gentle soul that you see in his music, and it's so warm and so embracing, and even as it is kaleidoscopic in its influences, it's still something that always draws you back to this very genuine, warm spirit. And that's something every time I hear his music, it really touches me deeply.
Which is, considering the time in which it was written and the aesthetic that dominated that time, where it was a very intellectual kind of thing, a very kind of thinky kind of thing.
That's right.
So not that he wasn't a thinker, he was a really interesting thinker.
Absolutely.
But it really emanated from a different kind of spirituality, a different kind of place.
That's right. And that, I think, is what's radical about it, actually, is the fact that it was, the status quo was this direction, and he was going that direction. And I think that that's something so beautiful about what he was doing, and that commitment to his own voice is something that I think is an inspiration for composers. John Luther Adams, of course, as we just saw, but composers well beyond, and I think he's got a very important role to play in the future of music in this country and beyond.
So one of the I think the most remarkable things that's happened in music over the last several years is this growing kind of amazing interest in new opera and
Yeah.
new theatricality with music.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you suppose explains that? Because 10, 20, 30 years ago, to have a new opera, to have a commission for a new opera, was a very rare kind of thing. And now
Yeah.
suddenly everybody is doing it. What do you think kind of accounts for that?
I think that a lot of contemporary art is moving in the direction of convergences of the art, of the arts as a whole. That you're starting to see pieces and all of the different art forms trying to intersect with each other. And actually, that's the genesis of opera. I mean, opera really is the very first multimedia art form. It's the first one that really did bring all the arts together in a way that didn't have a roadmap. You know, the people that wrote the first operas didn't know what they were doing. That's why they called it opera, because it just meant work. Because what else do you call this thing in which you draw a composer and a librettist and a poet, actually not a librettist, but
Yeah.
a scenographer and a choreographer, and you put them all together and let's see what you get. And I feel like it's a very contemporary notion, and I
Right.
feel like that's a notion that is starting to have even more currency.
Well, the mashup, the sort
Yeah.
of contemporary culture, and being able to kind of draw from all sorts of things and
Yeah.
experiences in all sorts of different forms,
Yeah.
it seems to me like a very opera kind of thing.
Yeah. I also think that there's another, I think it feels very contemporary now to think about collaboration not as something that detracts from an individual artist, but actually something in which every individual artist that collaborates with other artists is taken to another level. That's again, I think that's the core of opera. I think that was the initial impetus behind opera, and I think that's something that still feels incredibly that feels more contemporary maybe than 30 years ago, where so much was about this individuality and this purity of the art form. You know,
Right.
and I actually think that John Cage in America played a huge role in starting to think about how the art forms can intersect with each other and have a dialogue with each other. And you know, his collaborations with Merce Cunningham, for example, or with a lot of other visual artists, or the Fluxus movement, and all of these artist movements that grew out of the idea of how the arts can be in dialogue with each other and take each other to a new place, but not by throwing it all into a kind of Gesamtkunstwerk muddle, but actually allowing each art to have space around itself. And I think that's something that I think a lot of composers are really excited about these days.
Yeah, we often talk about technology and the pace of change that's happening right now, as if this has never happened in the course of the world. But in
Right.
fact, a lot of the 20th century was about technology and change. You think
Yeah.
about the invention of light bulbs and cars, and technology changed that. And a lot of these early American composers
Yeah.
or American composers of the early 20th century were very much preoccupied with this idea of technology and the ideas behind technology shaping the art that they do. And we're
That's
actually
right,
in
that's
that
right.
kind of time right now as well.
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I mean, that's one of the major impetuses behind doing a new opera in a train station with the technology
Sure.
that we have. I mean, that's something that was not even realizable 10 years ago, I think. And now
Sure.
it's something that is within our power. And this last summer, I worked on the world premiere of Stockhausen's Mittwoch aus Licht. And a big part of that is this helicopter string quartet, which this part of it has been performed before, but it involves live streaming of a video and 4 different players and 4 different helicopters flying over a city. So these kind of crazy ideas that involve technology and showing how technology can actually infuse the classical art form
Right.
is something that I think makes me feel very excited about the future possibilities of music and new ways of creating a musical or operatic experience.
And so if you bring it around to the aesthetic of a Lou Harrison or a John Luther Adams, which in a way you could argue are very sort of analog type composers.
Yeah.
But there is still that kind of interesting kind of pioneering, exploring kind of spirit that's
True.
behind it that I think is consistent.
Yeah, I absolutely think so, and I think that what I love the pioneering spirit for Lou Harrison in particular, I love the influence of the Indonesian music and the gamelan in particular. I mean, that's something that I've always actually really loved Balinese gamelan, and realizing that this other kind of gamelan that's the Javanese, the one that really inspired Lou Harrison, the one that is gentler and almost more seductive. The Balinese one is very percussive and very loud, and the Javanese gamelan that inspired Lou Harrison is so warm, inviting, and the way that he infuses that into a kind of American idiom is something that I think is so fantastic and so gripping in his music, and is I think also part of his resurging popularity in a way. Is I think people are realizing that that's something that is absolutely fascinating and also quite radical from the time.
Sure. Well, and another composer that's quite prominent in this year's festival is John Cage, of course, who spent a career rethinking, redefining, what actually music is.
Yeah, absolutely. He makes us question everything about music.
Sure.
Makes us actually even just question what the nature of music is at its root, and saying if this can be, he was so inspired by Duchamp, and Duchamp who said this is an artwork because I say it's an artwork. The idea that with Cage he can say this is a piece of music because. Not just because I say it's a piece of music, but actually because if we can listen to it the right way, we'll see that it is music, and we'll see that everything around us is music. But that takes a bit of a switch of our minds,
And isn't it interesting that conversation has been going on now for 100 years?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, for a very, very long time.
Oh,
it
yeah.
isn't just a contemporary notion.
Yeah, absolutely. So. I think that John Cage. Obviously, there's been a lot of his performances lately because of his centenary.
Sure.
But I think we're still only beginning to grasp the revolutions that he's created in music primarily, but I think the arts in general. I think he's had such an enormous impact across all of the disciplines, and it's so great to see him celebrated in a context like Ojai. And I always think to myself that every composer. When you're listening to a piece of any composer, you are getting a viewpoint of the world, and you're getting a very individual viewpoint of the world. And I think composers like Cage and Lou Harrison leave this open frontier for us, and they show us that the world is still a limitless place, and that's something that's so inspiring. And really, every time you can hear that live, it's an opportunity you can't pass up.
Absolutely. Well, Yuval, it's just a pleasure to talk with you, and thanks for dropping by.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and if you stay tuned, in about 10-15 minutes, we'll be back with the late night concert, which starts at 10:30 and lasts about an hour, and we've got some Cage and some really interesting music coming up.
Great.